Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. My name is Syed Dza bin Syed Badrusaman, entry number 2012565. In this video, I will present a brief introduction to the case of Felthouse versus Bindley. The Felthouse versus Bindley case, dating back to 1862, is a significant case in contract law. It ruled that silence or no action was considered acceptance, emphasizing the importance of clear communication in contract creation. This precedent established a foundational understanding of the acceptance condition in contract law. Now that I have explained to you the brief introduction to this case, I will pass it to Amir and talk about the facts of the case.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Amir Zairin with the metric number 2020487 and will be presenting some facts relating to the Felthouse versus Bindley case. As mentioned by Brother Sayeed in the short intro, this law case has presented itself as a significant and familiarized case in the realm of contract law. The 19th century case involved the issue of silence or lack of action as a constitution of acceptance for offer of a contract. So here are some of the key facts of the case. Paul Felthouse, the plaintiff in this case, engaged in a verbal conversation with his nephew, John Felthouse, expressing his interest in purchasing a horse. Following their discussion, Paul formalized his intent through a letter which he communicated that in the absence of any further communication from John regarding the horse, he would assume acceptance of the offer, thereby completing the transaction. Unfortunately, John, the nephew, failed to respond to the letter promptly as he was occupied with auctions. Intriguingly, Mr. Bindley, the defendant in this matter, was responsible for overseeing these auctions. So sensing the potential of the sale of the horse, John, in an effort to prevent the transaction, advised Mr. Bindley not to proceed with the sale. Despite these instructions, an inadvertent error occurred, leading to the accidental sale of the horse to a third party. The series of events forms the backdrop of the Felthouse versus Bindley case, where the central legal question revolved around the validity of a contract and the impact of communication or lack thereof in contractual agreements. So we can move on to the issues of the case.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Fahad bin Saeed and my metric number is 1834761. I hope you are all well known about the case of Felthouse versus Bindley from the brief introduction and the facts of the cases which are already being explained. So now I am going to share with you about the major issues from the case which I have pointed out. So firstly, in the case of Felthouse versus Bindley, the issue was whether the offer is silence would constitute acceptance of the offer or not. This case, Felthouse versus Bindley, calls into questions that whether or not a valid contract existed between the offerer and the offeree. So the first issue which I have pointed out is that whether Paul Felthouse, the plaintiff, owned the horse at the time of sale of the horse in the auction. And the second issue is whether John Felthouse, the nephew of the plaintiff, accepted the offer of his uncle. In order to prove that there was a valid contract between Paul Felthouse and the defendant, the most important issue here is whether silence or a failure to reject an offer amount to acceptance or not.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Abdullah Lutfi with metric number 1832227. So in the judgment of the Felthouse versus Bindley case, the court held that there was no binding contract. This decision was contrary to the Felthouse claims, saying that there was an agreement in place. And the crucial point in the judgment was that for a valid contract to exist, there must be a clear offer and acceptance. And silence or failure to respond does not constitute an acceptance. In this case, the nephew did not explicitly agree to sell the horse at the stated price, and therefore there was no mutual assent or meeting of the minds necessary for the formation of contract. That's all from me. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Ni Azfar Samae, matric number 1926939. Reasoning the case of the Felthouse versus Bindley hints on the idea that a valid contract requires clear communication of the existence. In this particular situation, it became evident that there was no explicit agreement for the sale of the house. For Felthouse assumed that his offer to purchase a house from his nephew was accepted. As his nephew John did not respond due to being preoccupied with other matters, John, on the other hand, believed that the offer was accepted because there was no explicit rejection. However, the court ruled that this acceptance was insufficient due to the silence of the John. The judge emphasized the importance of the mutual understanding between the parties for a valid offer. Essentially, for a contract to be a valid, there need to be a clear offer followed by the unambiguous acceptance, which was lacking in this case. The court decision highlighted the significance of the transparency and intentional communication in a contract formulation. In conclusion, this principle within the contract law concluded this legal saga.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Majid with the matric number 1816213. So I'm going to hyper my presentation. For now, I'd like to explain the analysis for this case. As we know from the judgment, the plaintiff was willing to the suit. So by what reasons that they can be a model as an example to show everyone, and even influence the too many cases in our case. Let's move to the case and see how the case developed. Analysis of this case led to a preliminary conclusions in plaintiff's favor, and we have no quarrel with the decision. The plaintiff, also the seller, wished to transfer the good to the original buyer on the basis of an already agreement. However, in the meantime, there was no right agreement between the parties and no substantive agreement with the buyer. Although the right notice states that if no reply is received, the contract will be demanded to have come into effect. It was not a crucial element in reaching an agreement, similarly to an inquiry in an offer. Up until the day of the action, the seller had been telling the auctioneer that not to sell the house because it had already been sold. In this case, also there was no formal right agreement. The seller had the right to decide to how and to whom the goods would be sold. In addition, a specific instruction had been given previously in the relation to the goods, and it was emphasized that the goods had already been sold. Also, we can see legal effects occurring that at the different time have the different consequence. If in the past the contract between the uncle and the nephew had not been valid because of the silence of the reply, the nephew's instruction to the actioner on the day of the action constituted a demand for the goods that were currently for sale. The demand respected the seller's claim. The concerning businessman should have sold or reserved the good at the seller's request. Since the seller has a legal right to do so during the consignment, However, the commission merchant had not the right to sell the goods after the request to return them was made. This is because, according to the section 4.3 of the Sales of Goods Act, property to be transferred in the future is called an agreement of the sale. If the agreement reached between them that both parties decided the state of the transaction of the goods, then the verbal agreement in the moment has the force of law. However, since the conditions for the establishment of the transaction have been fulfilled, the seller has sold the good at another person. In this conversation with the commission merchant, both parties mentioned that the good had been sold. Therefore, the sale of the good at this point in the time is not recognized and not permissible. When the good has already been sold according to the section 14A of the Sales of the Goods Act, the seller had an implied condition that in the case of the sales, he has the right to sell the goods in the case of the agreement of the sales. He will have the right to sell the good on the transfer of the property. And this law, the sale of the items was not recognized because when the seller announced that the good had been sold, the items was resold due to the negligence of the issued. It was therefore an incident caused by the negligence. Therefore, the plaintiff was fully empowered to take back his product. And in here, I'd like to conclude that having clarified the terms of the case, it is safe to assume that the judgment was correct and fair. Thank you so much. This is all for me.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Majachi. My metric number is 1810777. In Felthouse vs. Bindley, the court's decision highlighted the need for clear communication in the format of contract law. The judgment emphasizes that silence was not sufficient to constitute acceptance, and emphasizes that a contract requires a clear offer and acceptance. This principle still has a profound influence on contract law today, reminding people to avoid assumptions in legal agreements and insist on positive and clear communication.